back, everyone. Hope you all just have a great lunch. We are very happy to have two speakers here to talk about the latest opportunities in artificial intelligence. So I would like to start to ask Rachel and Esther. We see OpenAI launched the ChatGPT 4.0 last month, and everyone was saying it's like the movie Her coming to reality. Have you have been trying this, or how do you see how far we are from a movie to reality?
So
maybe
I'll go ahead first. Okay, so for those of you who might know, I actually came from an industry background. So before I launched 3 Capital, I used to work for one of the largest AI company in Asia. So I was a founding member of the company, and I was in charge of investment. So think about it, that was 7 years ago. So 7 years ago, we were in the AI 1.0 era. What do we mean by that? AI 1.0 era is when you know that the thesis work, but the actual implementation is so costly that people don't have a sense of genuine direction where to go. So last week, when GPT-0 came out, I believe that we have, actually for the most part of last year, end of last year, we've entered into AI 2.0 era, where AI is truly being democratized. So people can actually, everybody, I'm sure all of us here have used AI already in our daily lives. And so it really helps to propagate the speed of AI. And I believe that apart from GPT-0, there'll be other interesting players coming out as well.
Rachel?
So my name's Rachel. I'm based in Malaysia and Singapore. I mostly invest in Southeast Asia in both venture credit and equity and credit. And so over the last 7 years, we've been investing in a lot of AI. If you're talking about mind-blowing, sending people to the moon, her situations, I think we're a little bit further than what we think. But at the same time, we also see AI applications in autonomous vehicles. We see ChatGPT. I joke that it's now finally mass market because my mom writes it and uses ChatGPT for her speeches. And again, some of these things are more real-life application versus just in the background right now. And that's certainly been on the forefront of everybody's mind at this point. But again, I think we're much further than we think for robots taking over the world. But at the same time, we're much closer to real-life application in the long run.
Yeah. I think last year, 2023, we have been calling it as an explosive years of AI investment. So I have some number over here. According to PitchBook data, so it's like a record of more than 29 billion capital has been invested, more than almost 700 generative AI deals last year. And that's representing 268% increase of all the deals in 2022. So how do you two see the AI opportunities across Asia or globally?
So AI is such a broad term, but when we think about investment in AI, it's largely fall under 4 categories of AI that we can invest in, right? The fundamental elements of AI, so to speak. So we have, first of all, the data. What kind of data do we collect? The kind of data that we curate is quite important. So one of the biggest company in this sector is a company called Scale.ai. They recently just completed another $1 billion of fundraising. So that would be number one element. The number 2 element is the hardware side. So of course, all of you know of NVIDIA. But I also believe that there's a lot of interesting newcomer that may come potentially as a potential disruptor to this hardware sector. So that would be one. And I will include data center into the hardware side as well. The third element is the algorithm. So what's behind algorithm is human capital. So the world's most expensive, most valuable unlisted private companies are both, the top 3 all fall into this category. So you have OpenAI, you have Databricks, and these are all algorithm companies. And the fourth element is the feedback loop. This is where China can actually have a niche potentially over other countries, because we have a very, very quick feedback loop compared to the rest, but I can go into a little bit detail later on this sector. But when you think about these 4 different categories, as I said, potential initial stage of disruption would definitely come from the picks and shuffle. So I would say category 2. okay? So in terms of data center and also in terms of potentially AI chips. And the way we think about it at 3Cap, we want to invest, because our LP, our investors, think very long term. The fund is 4+4. So whatever company we invest today, we want to make sure that it will still be here 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, right? So that's why we take a very conservative and yet innovative approach to actually have a lot of strict KPI to make sure that the picks and shuffle companies that we invested in falls into this particular category. So that would be the initial opportunity. But when the AI wave go, I believe that there will be opportunity on the application layer. So that would be the second stage. But at the initial stage, this is where we focus on.
What about you, Rachel?
So I'm going to, since Esther has talked about this, I'll talk about the infrastructure. In Southeast Asia, because of the US-China trade relationships, it's been a big beneficiary for semiconductor investments, data centers, high-tech AI data centers across the board. A lot of the manufacturing plants for EV cars are now moving over. If you think about EV, there's 750 times more chips than a typical cell phone. And so we do see a lot of the investments coming into Southeast Asia in a much bigger way from that standpoint. Intel, Google, Microsoft, everyone's been announcing billions of dollars every week in Southeast Asia right now, in investment into Southeast Asia. In Malaysia, Intel has been around since 1972, building up chips businesses in the country. And so for us, we're making it more intuitive and more direct, a lot larger in terms of investments. But basically, data centers, energy transition's been big. We've been investing in solar and hydro, just to kind of make sure that green energy also comes in play at the same time. And then we're looking to democratize energy in Asia, which means if Malaysia is able to sell power to Singapore, and Singapore is able to kind of utilize some of this information, under the ground or in the grid, it's probably makes a little bit more sense for us to kind of invest, and that's more direct. And another thing that we've been looking off is like the ancillaries, for EV cars, because right now, if you think about cars, it's basically a big cell phone. But that just moves around, right? And so we're looking at that as an immediate opportunity for us.
So I also note both of your funds is counting a very prominent Asian business family or family offices as your key investors. So when you're picking investments, or what's the most frequent asked questions that your family office investors most interested in?
Okay, so I'm very fortunate. My LP, my big LP is here, my partner is here. So it's one of the most prominent family in Hong Kong and richest one in Asia. And I'm very lucky to count them as my key LP. So the wave of, this particular wave of investment is different from mobile internet. And it's very different from the last wave of PC. Why is that? Because it comes extremely quickly. It curves up very, very quickly, and also the cycle is very short. What I mean by that? It's very specific. The knowledge base that you needed for AI is significantly more specific than the knowledge base you need for, say, mobile internet investment. I'll give you an example, right? So I think all of us are investors here, so you probably heard about one paper. If I had to ask you what is the single paper that everybody heard of in AI, I think you can all tell me maybe it's a paper called Attention is All You Need by Google, right? That's the paper that everybody heard of. But if I want to ask you, what is the next 10 paper that influenced AI in the last decade? Most AI investors, they would not have heard of it, right? So AI is very specific because unless you have really done AI, unless you have really be a scientist or be part of the team that incubate AI company, or unless you have been actually doing the implementation, commercialization of AI, you cannot tell the difference between one paper and the other. As an outsider, they all look very similar to you. So the technical bar to actually be a proper AI investor, I'm talking about the deep tech version of the AI investment, is very, very high. So you notice a lot of people are right now hiring data scientists or AI specialists in the PE world. And it takes, what, 7, 8 years to train one? So that's why I think I have, or maybe coming from an industry background, we actually have a unique advantage, an unparalleled advantage, because we actually have all these great AI PhDs and talents, and they can all leverage on this platform to do the best, most technical investment that sometimes a family office, right? Because family office usually is, in this part of the world, is mostly trading property background, for instance. They don't have that kind of technical know-how. So it becomes a very natural marriage of the two. We can actually utilize each other on the funding side, and they also trust us on the AI expertise side.
Yeah, Rachel, how do you pick?
For us is what's a real life application in manufacturing? You know, we're backed by a lot of manufacturing businesses in Southeast Asia. And so basically is, you know, can we put AI into our factories? And again, you know, this is one example, right? You know, are we able to do advanced testing on some of the, you know, materials that, you know, comes in, whether it's semiconductors, which means you're talking about 7mm detection on fraud or faults, you know, or, you know, whether the systems are able to talk to each other, you know, from system A to system B to system C. You know, I think we're talking about real life application right now. And so when we're investing into AI, we're thinking about how do we deal with real life applications on a day-to-day basis. And so for us, that's probably key at this point. And then the second thing of all is, you know, what is the real use case in terms of monetization that's top of mind for every family right now? We can invest, you know, billions of dollars, but, you know, when do we start monetizing this? It looks like it's sooner rather than later at this point, especially when we, you know, roll it out in our factories. And so it's been good and encouraging for us.
Yeah, so we also just mentioned that last year we see so much capital is like rushing into this field. So we definitely see some of the top stellar company already reaching very high valuation. So how do you pick the right pick, or how to avoid casualty?
As I mentioned, at different stage of the investment, if we look at different kind of the different categories. I think AI 2.0, in the era of AI 2.0, we just see the dawn since ChatGPT last year, so we're still at a very early stage. So at this particular time frame, looking at picks and shuffle is the right strategy. I know that this is semi-controversial because I know a lot of us here is actually looking at application layer. I'm not saying application should not be looked at. However, I'll be extremely careful because when the marginal cost of intelligence is 0, right? Think about it, right? I don't know how many of you actually have tried GPT-S. Anybody? So GPT-S allowed complete codeless application. So my 6-year-old daughter, she can actually write an APP, okay? So the most powerful programming language going forward, guess what? It's English. That's it. So the marginal cost of intelligence is 0. Think about it. What is the implication? That means that amazing applications can come up very quickly and by a very, very small team. But that also means that the valuation itself can potentially be rather volatile. Now, that is okay if you are a short-term investor, but for me, I think most of us here, we work, I started a fund. Again, the fund has a mandate, so we need to make sure that the company can sustain long-term. So at this particular point in time, investing in the underlying hardware, and which I believe there's a lot of room for efficiency improvement, is the right approach to go. So when you look at the amount of money pouring into AI last year, when you think it's 29 billion, actually I noticed a very interesting trend. The single biggest category of AI investment increase is actually in data center. Why is that? Because data center give you a relatively stable return. But data center also has its own tech barrier, right? It's not just a matter of getting chips. You also need to know how to run a cloud cluster. So right now, everybody claims they can do it, but I believe that this end of this year, beginning of next year, you will start to see some casualties. And so how to discern the casualty, going back to what your question is, you need a team that has a tech background to genuinely tell who's the cat from the little tiger cubs.
What about you, Rachel? How do you pick the right?
How do I pick? We're in the venture business, and so to be fair, there's a lot more losers than winners, and I would be, honest with that. We try to make sure that our losers are more than the winners from a value-added standpoint. And so we look at the technology, we look at the founder, we look at the use case scenario. Something like this, for example, like the translation services, it's all AI, right? It's very fast, it's very instant. Some of these things, if we're able to see the use case and the application for it, we will probably invest. But that's again because we're a lot more risk averse than the others. And so, there's no good answer to how do I pick a winner and who goes to the moon first. But, there's obviously some ways to kind of mitigate downside in the long run.
Yeah. Very glad to see we have some AI elements at our venue today. So yeah, I want to dive a little bit to maybe Rachel, you already mentioned a little bit. So now it's under the China-US tensions. We see a lot of restrictions in chip imports and export, a lot of restrictions on other chip products to a lot of Chinese companies. So how do you see that all the development, AI development in China right now and all the large language models all the Chinese companies are building, or would you invest or would you avoid, or how do you see the opportunities out there?
Well, for us, Southeast Asia has been a big beneficiary of US-China trade war. We're kind of in the middle, we're neutral, or someone told me the reason why we're neutral is because we're not strong enough to be anyone's friend. And so if you think about it from that standpoint, we have to be neutral. There's been a lot of diversion from the U.S. capital to Malaysia or Southeast Asia, and similarly a lot of diversion from Chinese capital to our part of the world, purely because, one, we've got a long-established deep tech ecosystem since the 70s, but also at the same time, I think we are big beneficiaries from the fact that we have continuously invested and have been, the back end of the semiconductor space. If you think about, what has happened in the last 2 years or so, we've had, Chinese, Americans, Taiwanese, Korean manufacturers starting up platforms or factories in Malaysia. Penang has a big ecosystem over there. And again, it's not just, people, but also land, cheap land, energy, clean water, friendly relationship, diplomatic relationships across the globe. And so we've been fortunate that way. And I see us being fortunate in the next, 5 to 10 years or so with political stability moving forward. And so for us, I think we've been a big beneficiary and will be continuously a big beneficiary in the next couple of years. So good for us, I guess.
Yeah, and Esther, you're from a SenseTime background. You worked there for several years, and then you have a close watcher for all the AI developments in China.
So first of all, the fund 3Cap does not have a China focus. Okay, so we actually invest in opportunities, prioritize opportunities outside of China. But to answer your question, I do believe that, and we've seen it firsthand. Whenever there's opportunity, whenever there's challenges, actually it brings a very unique set of opportunities. So what is the biggest challenge that we have in China right now? I'm just talking about China right now, okay? Because US has imposed a chip ban to China a year and a half ago. So amongst the 4 ingredients of AI, the hardware part China is missing. But guess what? Because it is missing, it actually encourages a very flourishing local ecosystem of chips, domestically produced innovative solutions of chips coming from China. So that would actually be an opportunity for them. And also another thing I want to point out is that whenever there's a lack of resources, the importance of engineering genius emerges, right? Think about it, why China and India? Think about the world's top engineer. It's always from China and India. Why? Because we're both poor countries. Mm-hmm. When you're poor, you need to make the most out of it, okay? So when you think about the efficiency of an NVIDIA H100, when you run in a GDX, when you run in a data center, it's around 40 to 50%. That's it. Think about it, right? All the power you need to run, according to Wall Street Journal, it's the power of Argentina, right, to run OpenAI. But the efficiency rate of the chip is only 50% at its best. Guess what? a lot of interesting infrastructure inferencing companies emerge around the world, but in particular China. They have companies that actually can fine-tune the algorithm so that we can increase the efficiency of these chips. So this is actually useful not just in China. Of course, it's applied globally. Now, going back to the fund, we actually look at these opportunities, but we don't look at this. We don't look at China-specific opportunities. However, these kind of companies is a great example on why sometimes a challenge can also become a very good opportunity as well.
So we have just talked about, we see a lot of like infrastructure, AI infrastructures, investment and building. So how far do you see like all the software-wise, like or application-wise, that Asians need to catching up to the global phase, or what's the opportunity out there? Or
yeah, go ahead. Okay, so the other thing that I want to add on, and thank you for the question, is that think about the 4 elements of AI. I always go into the 4 elements. The last element is the feedback loop, okay? So you have data, you have the hardware, you have the software, and you have the feedback loop. So what do I mean by feedback loop? Feedback loop is that when an algo works, why? When the algo doesn't work, can it tell me quickly why it doesn't work? So this is a very unique advantage that China actually has. Because we have a lot of population. So, and also China runs everything more efficiently than most of the world, as you know. So in China, the feedback loop is very short. In Chinese, we say the 试错成本很低. Okay, 试错成本很低. So that's why you see the great company that is amazing in operation in the last mobile internet era, such as TikTok, such as Meituan, those such as Ali. Those are all companies from China, obviously. So I think going back to where are the opportunities, China is unlikely to come up with, China will have its own version of OpenAI, because again, LLM is going to be a matter of every country will have its own large language model, right? However, am I betting on China having an LLM that can surpass the best LLM coming in from US? I'm not writing it off now. But the chances is at least it's not extremely high, right? Let's put it at that. However, I do believe that China will have amazing application layer companies. You don't need the absolute 99.9999% top algorithm to produce a top operationally AI applicable popular company. You just need 99.999 perhaps, right? So the cost of the marginal improvement is so high that maybe, I'm just saying maybe, we don't need that. So that is the China unique opportunity.
And Rachel, that like you have been talking that Malaysia has been the beneficiary of like some of the geopolitical. Yep. And then how do you see like general all the opportunity in AI in Southeast Asia? I know your fund is looked at the border region.
For us, AI has always been, a strong foothold for us, right? Again, I think if you want to invest in innovation, you have to be open-minded about how you think about AI or tech as a whole, to be honest. And so for us, we've looked at AI as, again, and we've talked about, what is the real use case scenario. Technology in Southeast Asia is probably not as advanced as the US or in China, to be honest. We don't get the same feedback loop as what you would get in China, as what Esther pointed out. But I think we're able to kind of craft it in a very localized manner. And so when you look at what we get, or what Grab, for example, uses the data for, and what Didi uses this data for, it's probably very different. Someone like Grab uses it to kind of feel, credit into small, medium businesses. But that's using an algorithm to write out credit scorecards, which typically does not happen or is available in the local markets. So again, the way we have to look at AI as a whole, or the applications of it, is very different because our markets are just not as advanced as the rest of the world. But again, that doesn't mean, we can't do it. It's just, very different from what typically would have been invested in the US or China.
So so my last questions about AI would be, so in the next 2 or 3 years, which of the area, maybe healthcare, electric vehicles, which area you see them have the most synergies that would be AI would be widely applied, or we'll see the next breakthrough very soon? Esther, maybe?
So I want to answer in 2 layers. I think that my first response is that the part of the AI that I believe will be disrupted very, very quickly. How many of you currently own NVIDIA?
Several.
Everybody owns NVIDIA.
There's actually a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I do believe that NVIDIA has been doing all the right things to capture the GPU is not meant for training, by the way. The GPU is meant for computer graphics, right? But they've been doing all the right things and developed this amazing software infrastructure called CUDA so that they can capture entirely the training wave. And now the inferencing wave, right? In the latest earnings call, Jensen Huang mentioned that inferencing is the next big deal, okay? So I do agree with him, because the next wave of disruption must be from the edge device, right? Rachel mentioned car is an edge device, cell phone is an edge device. You guys are going to have a lot of robots in a few years. Those are called edge device, all of them. Even human being. In a few years, you can implant a chip in your brain. Human being can be an edge device as well. So the need for inferencing will explode, for sure. By that time, then I think right now there's a lot of potentially very interesting AI chip company that specialize in edge device that potentially can challenge NVIDIA. I'm not saying NVIDIA is going to drop its sales. The sales is not going to go down. However, the market share right now is 95%. That number is bound to go down in the next few years, for sure. Because we are looking at some very interesting companies right now that is en route to potentially disrupt that. So that's my first layer. And second layer is that going back to, in terms of the sector the edge device can disrupt, I do believe that medical is potentially one, and also is education. And the reason that these 2 are the sectors that I believe will have the most disruption is because currently these 2 are the sector with the most inequality. Think about it. A doctor in Asia versus a doctor in Bangladesh versus a doctor in, I don't know, somewhere in Africa. With the help of AI, they can have the same access. So can you imagine the delta from the guys in Africa or South America or some parts of Asia? So I think these 2 are the sector, because the delta is so big, the disruption is also the biggest.
Rachel?
For me, it's a very practical answer, which is everyone is racing to the most technological advanced semiconductors. So how about the semiconductors that have nowhere to go, right? So go into EV cars. And so if you think about it, we now actually, our phones, our watches, iPads are all electrical. And so with oil prices where it is, and everyone looking at green energy, I think EV cars is just a very natural, as prices go down, it's probably the biggest beneficiary from, the race to the bottom for semiconductors. And so therefore, it's probably the most likely winner from this.
Okay, we are running out of time, but one last question. We ask every panelist today, what's the most investment you're most proud of, or the most successful investment you ever made? Esther?
Personal or professional?
Can be either.
I would consider this a personal investment, even though some of you can dabble in this. So around 10 years ago, I read a random article on Facebook. They talk about a company, a guy, a 27-year-old guy, that actually become the largest drug smuggler in the US with 27 million transactions a month or something. And then the operation he used, the company he operates is called Silk Road. And then the medium he used is a thing called Bitcoin. So I was very curious. I said, what is Bitcoin? So I deep dive into this. And so I spent a few $1,000s 10 years ago to buy some Bitcoin.
Very interesting story. Rachel? Okay. Mine was more passion and fun and stupidity, I guess. in the past when I was in Hong Kong, and I have a friend there called Nick. We used to do a lot of whiskeys, and then at one point I started being really big into buying whiskeys because it was just fun, and also stupid, I guess. So then I ended up buying a bunch of very rare whiskeys over the years. I did not know whether it was any good, but recently I was told by the Diageo guys that it's now 20-fold, and so those bottle of whiskeys have now gone back to the auction houses to be sold. So that was really it.
Rachel, Esther, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.